Well, good afternoon, fellow constitutionalists, and welcome to Free-4-All-Friday, a Christian political talk show. This is episode 837. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your constitutional warrior fighting for your right just to be an American. It is July 7th, in year of our Lord 2017. Remember, we're a hyphen-free, PC-free zone. God is still in control, and He does love you. And I'm broadcasting live from the Hemlock Studios here in the beautiful Central Susquehanna Valley in the great Keystone State. And if you want to talk to me today, I'm on the chat rooms. I have both chat rooms open. Everything, Lord willing, the creeks don't rise. Everything looks like it's actually working fairly good today. I am, like I said, I have both chat rooms open here. And let me get over to the one. There we go. Blog Talk Radio and the YouTube chat room. Basically what happened yesterday, folks, and I think it's just, I'm going to have to break down and buy another mixer. I mean, there's no two ways about this. Real quick here for those guys that like to, trying to start their own, what I'm doing here, and couldn't find all the answers on YouTube. I've been sort of trial and error, as it were. Evidently, the last time I had the power surge, it did something to the board where I have to unplug it at night. I have to unplug the power, and I also have to unplug the USB from not just, I tried it with the computer one night, it didn't work, from the motherboard, and let that, and I unplugged the whole USB cable from the computer and the motherboard, and sort of let that de-energize, however that happens. So it seems like everything's working good today. I went through yesterday and reset some things on my Ethernet cards on my production computer, and also on all three computers. I reset. I know on my Linux computer, the Linux program automatically takes the Ethernet up to its highest settings, which I wish Windows 10 did that. I wish you didn't have to go in and set all these parameters, especially like on your Ethernet. So I have both my production and my my video production computer, and then just my main computer, both set up to where they're doing huge packages, and where they're actually seem to be working fairly well. I won't swear completely to it, but I mean, they seem to be doing completely well. They're both amping up, as it were, and we're keeping the connection so far. So we'll see how that happens. And I do have the new router, which actually is a dual core router. The other one I have up here, the Buffalo router, is not a dual core, but it did have a gigabit switch on it, and the radio part of it's starting to go, and I'm just wondering if the processor's starting to go too because of overheating. So I'm going to be replacing my router over the weekend. Hopefully that'll eliminate a lot of issues with the Ethernet and the broadcasting of the show here. And I'm going to keep the Buffalo in backup because it's not totally broke in case something happens to the new one. At least have a good backup that I know how to work with in the wings waiting. Hopefully everybody's had a good week. Hopefully everybody's looking forward to the weekend. I know it was a short week. Most people only worked 3 days this week, and they're probably still looking forward to the weekend because they haven't recuperated from the long holiday weekend. So it's I always did. Even after a long holiday weekend, I still look forward to the weekend after working in that. So I don't do a lot anymore with the fibromyalgia. It limits me on what I can or cannot do. I got some yard work I want to try to get to today and tomorrow. My wife is out there pulling weeds around her flower beds, and I told her, I said, honey, just put them in a pile. I'll rake them up and take them down and put them on our, I have a compost pile behind my shed down there that we really don't use it. We don't garden or anything like that. We just have a pile that we can put weeds and everything on and just let it compost down into dirt. So I do have my work cut out for me this weekend. Tomorrow, I'm hoping tomorrow, if it dries out, to back my pickup truck up to the basement and start. I got to do some cleanup and clean out of the basement. Spend just a couple hours doing that, so I don't overwork my muscles to make them sore. Things have been getting better on that front with me getting more used to the medicine. I'm recouping quicker. I think that might have something to do with my drinks that I drink every day, and this is the official drink of the Dan Clement Show, the Rocky Mountain High brand. They're hemp-infused drinks. They're energy drinks. They got caffeinated tea, black tea. It's really good. My wife really likes that, but I got off caffeine, so I won't be drinking that anymore. I drink the lemonade, which tastes like the old-fashioned Fresca, which I really like, and it's a good flavor for me. So this is they're not sponsoring the show, but this is the official drink of the Dan Clement Show. And they got 100 milligrams of hemp oil, cannabis oil. No THC or anything in it, per 16-ounce drink there. You got energy shots, you got Rocky Mountain High bars that are hemp-infused protein bars. They got Eagle Spirit water. So the whole shebang. And folks, I do believe that it is helping me. It is helping me. There hasn't been a test done. I can't quantify that. I just know how I feel with it. In full disclosure, I am an investor in the company. It's part of my retirement portfolio. So just to give you full disclosure on that. All right. Today's daily Bible reading comes from 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verses 11 through 13. And this is Paul talking to the Corinthians. For it has been declared unto me concerning you, my brethren, by those of Chloe's household, that there are contentions among you. Now I say this, that each of you says, I am of Paul, and I am of Apollos, or I am of Cephas, or I am of Christ. Is Christ divided? Was Paul crucified for you? Or were you baptized in the name of Paul? And Paul is talking about, and this is like the earliest example we have in scriptures about denominationalism. You know, you have Lutherans out there, Martin Luther. You have Baptists that follow Calvin. You have Methodists that follow John Wesley. You know, the whole thing, they follow these men's teachings of the Bible instead of following the Bible itself. We have been, the members of the Church of Christ have been accused of being Campbellites, and I had a short Bible lesson earlier in the week about this, that the Church of Christ did not start with the American Restoration Movement. The Church of Christ started back in AD 33. So, you know, with the crucifixion of Jesus Christ and on the first day of Pentecost, the establishment of the church. That's how far back we trace our roots, because we use the Bible and nothing but the Bible. Today's quote mail comes from A.W. Tozer. I like that last name, Tozer. We Christians must simplify our lives or lose untold treasure on earth and in eternity. Modern civilization is so complex as to make the devotional life all but impossible. The need for solitude and quietness has never been greater than it is today. And we also talked about that earlier about, was a Wednesday, talked about Jefferson being a Renaissance man. And we have too many men in this country that are caught up in the circus and bread of life. And what I mean by that is they're building these man caves. And it's a badge of honor for them to have these man caves, but they're not feeding their souls. They're not feeding their intellect by having these man caves and watching these games. And I'm nothing against sports. It has its place as part of our entertainment, but when we make it all about the sports and we forget about our devotional life to God, that's where we run into a lot of trouble. Today's short Bible lesson comes from Wes McAdams over at radicallychristian.com and his Bible teachings that unbelievers love to hate. It's a good article, folks. He posted this back on June 28th of this year. So if you want a good read, Bible teachings that unbelievers love to hate, and it is just so poignant for today. You know, it's speaking to us today about the skepticism that goes on in the world. I was watching the Rubin Report with Dennis Prager, and I can't remember this other gentleman's name. He was a skeptic, and Dennis Prager is a quote-unquote, well, he's Jewish, but he's also an apologist for Christianity through Judaism. And they were both making good points. I think Dennis Prager could have done better, and I'm not saying anything about this, but this skeptic, all his arguments were circular. You know, he tried to explain morality, that it's something that's inherent, innate in us, and that we as a society get together and decide what's moral, what's not moral, you know, and based on And he says these are reasonable assumptions, but they're actually moral assumptions that go way back to the creation of the earth. And so a lot of skeptics that I've listened to, their arguments are very circular. They have no beginning of where they base their morality on, and that's very, very telling. Now, I want to talk a little bit today about why do Americans want to federalize everything. It seems like for the past 90 years or so, or 100 years at least, Woodrow Wilson, it can go back even back to Teddy Roosevelt, that we want to federalize everything from schools to banks to food to drugs, the environment, transportation, elections, and the list goes on and on and on. And it seems like the anti-freedom, regressive socialists in America want to try to have the federal government govern as much as possible as they can. And my question is, whatever happened to the federalism of the founding fathers, where in the creation of the Constitution of the United States of America, the states guaranteed for themselves in that Constitution, because the states are the ones that created the Constitution, they guaranteed and protected for themselves in the Constitution a republican form of government. But it seems lately that more and more people want the federal government to do everything. And yesterday I didn't get to it, but Donald Trump's Commission on Voter Fraud has come up against this idea of federalism. Now, as far as going through the voter rolls, I'm not against that at all. But, and I've been sort of quiet on this, letting things sort of percolate on this, but the states have a right to withhold this information because it's not the federal government. It's not their job to make sure that the vote is true and accurate. It's the state. It's the state secretaries of states, the state legislatures, and the residents of that state. The citizens of each particular state have the right to ask from Freedom of Information Act. Using the Freedom of Information Act, they have the right to request this information is gathered by the state for these voter rolls. And in doing so, then they can go through and investigate that. And I think at a state level, that's where it needs to be. Now, you're going to have some states like New York, and you're going to have some states like California that are going to resist this. But I think there's some enough right-thinking freedom folks, conservatives who are freedom-minded, that can use the Freedom of Information Act to get the information they need and actually start going over the voter rolls and start challenging some of this stuff. And I know you can't, and a friend of mine, Michael, on Facebook says you can't prove a negative. And it's hard to prove a negative, and a lot of times it's nigh on impossible to prove a negative. However, these folks like Let America Vote, they sort of got out in front of the parade. I was reading some of their tweets, and I actually answered a couple of them. I'm like, yeah, you guys are taking credit for this whole movement against the federal commission. And I know darn well you didn't talk to some of these governors out there in these different states. So it's sort of like you got in front of the band right at the end of the race. And you know, these guys, they're part of a George Soros Open Society, Let America Vote. So they're against anything that might true the vote, whether it's voter IDs or whether it's going through and scrubbing the voter rolls. And, you know, making sure that only the people that are eligible and registered to vote are voting. And if you're not registered to vote, go down and register. If you can't get there, have a friend take you. These arguments, all these arguments against voter ID and registration and stuff like that are just, again, they're circular. They have no ending. Even if you prove that there is fraud, they're not going to believe that. And my thing is, so you can't prove a negative. So I've been asking these folks that don't want voter ID and so there is no fraud. I've asked them, I said, I want you to guarantee that there's no fraud. I want you to guarantee that only eligible citizens who are registered are voting. I want you to guarantee that. Mum silence. Mum silence on the whole thing. I've been in a discussion, talking about the federal government taking over everything. I've been in a discussion on Facebook with a gentleman about health care. A friend of mine from high school, they're twin brothers, but they or one of the other twin put this post up there wasn't a million people that died before Obamacare. There's not a million people going to die afterwards. And a friend of mine from high school, her parents are sort of in limbo here with this insurance that because the North Carolina didn't start up a federal exchange in their state, and I think rightly so, because we're talking, let's get back to the Constitution of Federalism. North Carolina and some other states recognized, and matter of fact, Pennsylvania was one of them too when Governor Colbert was here, and he was a governor here. He recognized that the federal government had no constitutional authority, no matter what Chief Justice Roberts said about the it's not a penalty if you don't have health insurance, it's a tax on that. And this gentleman that I'm talking to, he seems to be a young man. He's trying to confuse the issue and trying to do some fancy talk around, well, if a tax is a penalty, then a penalty on what's a penalty on a penalty? Sort of using some word things here. And, I told him, I said, well, you need to go back and read the Constitution. You're not reading the Constitution correctly. You're leaving things out. I said, please show me in the Constitution where the federal government has the enumerated power to govern over health care or health insurance. Either one. Show me either one. And again, their arguments are circular. They go around the arguments and nip at the peripheries, but they don't, at the borders of the argument. But they never get into the actual substance of the argument. Justice Roberts and those that were of the supporting opinion, and the affirmative opinion of Obamacare was constitutional, did two things that were unconstitutional. One, they mandated and actually put a penalty. I don't care if you call it a tax or not. It is a penalty. If you do not have health insurance, you're going to get taxed $2,000. It's not a tax. That's a penalty. Okay. And the other thing was they put the severability clause back into Obamacare because the Democrats on purpose left it out. And Chief Justice Roberts and those that sided with him said, well, we need to put this back in here. Well, that's legislating from the bench, folks. It's legislating from the bench, and that's unconstitutional. The judiciary is not to be creating law. They are to be adjudicating it, comparing what written law there is to the Constitution, in law and in fact. Article 3, Section 2, Clause 2 talks about they'll have appellate authority in these different areas in law and in fact. The fact is the Democrats left out the severability clause. They just left it out. And when they adjudicated the case, they put it back in. You can't do that. Judges aren't allowed to do that. They got to send it back down. They should have sent it back to Congress and said, hey, look, if we judge on this right now, this part's unconstitutional, the whole thing's unconstitutional because you didn't put a severability clause in it. And it may, honestly, if that would have happened, if the Supreme Court would have done what they were supposed to do in law and in fact, we may not have Obamacare today. We may not even be fussing and fighting about it today because it may never have passed again. I believe at the time, it would have taken quite a bit longer for it to get passed again and work its way back up through the courts. And by that time, I think a lot of American people could have understood and the whole thing could have been researched instead of like what Nancy Pelosi says, we got to pass it to see what's in it. Oh, I never heard such nonsense. And, and then she turns around with Ryan Care and she says, well, we have to read it before we can pass it. We got to see what's in it. Like yesterday never happened again. So I've been in this discussion with this young man, and there's a picture on his Facebook site. I'm not going to give his name out or anything, but there's a picture on his Facebook site with an inscription behind it, and it pretty much tells me his ideology with that picture. I mean, it may not tell his whole ideology, but where his leanings are totally regressive socialism, anti-freedom. I should have I should have the choice whether I want health insurance or not. I should have the choice of who I buy my health insurance from as an American citizen. I shouldn't be, if I don't want it, I shouldn't be forced to buy it. And this 24 million people that they wanted on Obamacare, the vast majority of them were young folks that decided not to have health insurance because they were healthy and they were sort of rolling the dice with it. But Obamacare couldn't work because they needed that money that they were going to get from this. And this is a stupid thing, and we've talked about this before. The money that they were going to get from these younger people who, under the law, didn't have to buy insurance until they got sick. And so and a lot of people took them up on that, not just the original young folks that decided not to get insurance. There's a lot of people said, well, why should I pay all these premiums when I get sick? I can just go and get the insurance and I'm covered. And I can't fault them on that logic when you have a law that's made this way. And folks, laws from the federal government in a constitutional republic that we have, first off, any laws that the federal government made have to be in accordance with the enumerated powers in the Constitution. That is their controlling or their guide. You know, that is the supreme law of the land, and it sets out 28 enumerated powers. That's it. And if it's not in that purview, no amount of twisting or anything should get you anywhere close to what we have today, because of the keeping the context of, or keep the Constitution in the context that you're supposed to. It was a limiting document. What I mean by limiting document, it was a document to limit the federal government and its powers. So from the get-go, you have to approach that document as totally limiting. It's limiting, folks. And so any statements in it are also limiting. It's not expansive, it's limiting. If you want, and I told this young man, I said the Supreme Court, and I've said this for many years, the Supreme Court is not the final arbiter of what is or is not constitutional. Well, he came back and he said they absolutely are the final arbiter. He didn't read my word final. He said they are the arbiter of what is constitutional or not. Mulberry versus Madison, the supremacy of the Supreme Court. And I knew that's what he was going to say, because that's a rote answer. That's one of their talking points. That's a narrative that the regressive socialist, the anti-freedom crowd has when it comes to judicial review. And so I had to school him a little bit on the Constitution. I said, and I told him, I said, you didn't read my comments. I said, the final arbiter of what is or is not constitutional is the American people. I know that blows a lot of people's minds, especially a socialist, that the American people would have the power to overturn a Supreme Court decision. Absolutely. We can amend the Constitution. If we wanted to, we could amend the Constitution to do away with Roe v. Wade and make the taking of an unborn child's life unconstitutional. Make it a penalty of law to protect the unborn children's life, and the Supreme Court would have no other choice but to start ruling on abortion cases that way, and all the lower courts and everything. It would be the federal law of the land when it comes to protecting the unborn child. And the people could do that. The people could get that amendment into the Constitution by proposing it either through the Congress or an Article 5 convention, Convention of the States, and then have 3/4 of the states ratify it. And then it would tie the Supreme Court's hands when it rules on abortion. We could pass a constitutional amendment that takes eliminates the Department of Education and puts all the schooling decisions back to the states with no block grants or anything. Just puts it back to the states. We can make an amendment, or we the people can amend the Constitution to say that, and then from that point on, the judiciary, because it's part of the Constitution now, would have to rule in cases according to the Constitution. You see how the American people are the final arbiter of what is or is not constitutional. But the anti-freedom folks out there, the regressive socialists, don't like that idea. And remember what I said earlier this week about socialism. It's funny to me how socialism as a political philosophy, never tries to start from the ground up with socialism. Going so good. Um, let's say that you take a very poor country that doesn't have a lot of resources, and let's say an African country, and you that is socialistic in nature. Well, socialism wants from the top down, wants to take care of everybody, wants to continue to do this for. It can, because there's no money. If you try to implement socialism into a poor country, there's no money to help anybody. And so it never works. And so go back in history, please. Go back in history and look at this. And again, I'm coming from the standpoint of freedom. The more freedom and liberty that people have, the better off they are. And the better off society and culture is. Now, there's some social justice, and I'm going to go back to say social justice warriors, just because that's what people think about when they think about social justice. When you go back and talk about social justice warriors and what they want to change the culture with the government. I mean, that's how we've changed our healthcare culture in the United States of America, is through the federal government from the top down, instead of changing it from the bottom up. And no system. I'm going to say this first off, because this is a criticism we get with the free markets. There's no system out there that's 100%, that you can guarantee that's going to help 100% of the people in the country. However, capitalism and free markets, not crony capitalism, and you got to distinguish them. A lot of socialists don't distinguish between capitalism and crony capitalism. When I talk about capitalism, I'm talking about free market capitalism. And when you start from the bottom up, and you have a free people, and they're free from the constraints, the overreaching constraints of the federal government. Matter of fact, if we go to the Constitution and actually look at the enumerated powers, pretty much everything else that the enumerated powers don't cover, if you read the 9th and 10th Amendment, belong to the states or we the people respectively. And so we should be taking care of these things. There's a lot of things that the state government shouldn't be taking care of. But the people in that state either try to get it changed. If they can't get it changed, guess what they can do? They can move. They can move to another state that aligns more with their values and become part of that culture in that state. That's the genius of federalism, that each state's like an incubator where they can test out these ideas to see if they survive the light of day, as it were. And to me, it's strange to me how we left that system and have arrived to where we're at today. And I know there's a lot of situations in America where people have made their beds, now they don't want to lie in them. They absolutely do not. Real quick here. My folks, and I know my mom and stepdad don't mind me talking about this. My mom and stepdad years ago bought insurance that will pay for extended or long living, or living in a nursing home. In other words, I don't want to get too fancy here, but they bought insurance that will allow them to live in a nursing home and pay the bills for that. There's a lot of people that chose not to do that, whether they couldn't financially afford that. And trust me, I tell you, my mom and stepdad are not rich by no stretch of the imagination, but they just put things away early on and did these things. There's other people out there that financially couldn't do it, or there's people out there who just chose not to. They figured Social Security, Medicare would take care of it. Well, guess what? Under Obamacare, if the states didn't, and this gentleman on Facebook was trying to school me on this, and I already knew this, I just let him talk. If the states didn't set up a healthcare exchange, then it goes to the federal healthcare exchange, but it doesn't pay it's a Medicaid expansion that would pay for long-term nursing home, assisted living. And if the state didn't set that up, then that state is not, if you live in that state, you're not eligible for that, from what I understand. But again, I go back to personal responsibility. What would these folks have done if these erroneous promises of Obamacare were never given in the first place? It's called incentives, and sometimes it's called adverse incentives or negative incentives. And this is what I'm driving at when we talk about these things. Folks, we need to get it in our heads that we need to do more for ourselves. And if we can do more for ourselves and get the government out of our lives, we'll have more money in our pockets. That's a foregone conclusion. If the federal government isn't taxing us to death, and our state governments aren't taxing us to death, and that's the other thing about state taxation, again, you can move. If you don't like what's going on, move. Period. You know, and that's, in a nutshell, that's where we're at, in a nutshell. That we can move and we can actually go to another state that has lower taxes. There's a lot of states that have lower taxes than Pennsylvania. Tennessee's one of them. Giving a shout out to Tennessee, to where my buddy Dave lives. Tennessee's one of them. Texas is another one. Florida's another one. South Dakota's another one, where one of my high school friends live. No state income taxes. And matter of fact, Florida, Texas, and South Dakota are the three states that folks who go full-time RVing, so all the residents don't have a permanent residence and go full-time RVing, they decide to domicile in, because any income that they make, you know, off the road or their YouTube channels or whatever, and that's how I follow a lot of these folks, is not taxed on the state level. Federal level, yes. State level, no. And so they choose to domicile at one of these other places. And again, that's the genius and the beauty of federalism. And we I have this article here by Ryan McMacken, Ryan McMacken over at Mises.org. We don't need a presidential commission on voter fraud. And I tend to agree with him. I was sort of up in the air. I was thinking, okay, let's see if there is voter fraud, because honestly, folks, with the way the Democrats operate, and we've seen how they operated in their primaries, it would not surprise me that in these Democratic strongholds like New York and California and some of these other places, that there wasn't mass voter fraud going on, where we had people that weren't eligible to vote, voting, and casting votes. And look, I myself and other people have made this allegation, okay? But it doesn't seem like anybody except President Trump wanted to try to investigate it. All we get from these regressive socialists out there, the anti-freedom crowds, is that there is no voter fraud. You can't prove voter fraud. And every day, folks, if I just spent this program on digging up and showing actual voter fraud, which I really don't want to, that's not what I really want to do, but if I did that, there's stories, it seems like they're coming out every day that talk about voter fraud, folks. There really is. Young man is going to jail in Virginia for registering dead people. Literally registering dead people. That's a fraud. That's a type of voter fraud. Election, and folks, I'm going to go and expand this out just a little bit more. Instead of saying voter fraud, I want to start using the term election fraud, because then it encompasses every bit of fraud. You remember the group Acorn? Acorn was turning in registrations that were being falsified. It was proven it was being falsified. Some of the folks went to jail over that. Voter fraud. I even bring that up, and I don't get a response to that. These folks that want to do these, like let America vote, when you ask them about that, they ignore it. They ignore it totally. And I'm like, how can you ignore something that was in the national news and that was actually going on? How can you ignore that, folks, really? So I just wanted to point it out, getting into this whole thing about, you know, why do so many Americans want the federal government to do everything? I think part of it is because we've grown lazy. As citizens, we've grown lazy. And we don't want to do the work, or we don't want to be part of a group that does the work, that actually looks into to see if something is fraudulent or not. The environment. I've talked about this a lot on this show over the years, since I've been on since 2008. I've talked about the environment quite a bit and how every state, I completed this years ago. I checked every state in the Union and also our protectors like Puerto Rico and Guam and other territories you might have. I may be missing a couple of them, but anyway, America's Samoan Islands, I guess. They all have a Department of EPA or something. It may not be named that, but it's a type of environmental protection agency at the state level, which is where it should be at. Because what works, I keep saying this, what works for the environment up in New York may not work down in Arizona or New Mexico. Totally different environment. And how can you have a one-size-fits-all federal bureau that takes care of the environment as a whole? Because what's going to happen is, if you relied on the federal government to do it, and other states had their own EPAs that are still functioning, by the way, there's going to be states that are going to be left out of it. There's going to be states that are left out of this environmental protection. And this is why the states are best suited to do this. This is why the states are best suited to handle all these things. Now, I got some other things in here. I just want to start going down through here. I'm going to save this freedom of speech for Germany for last. I just want to get through a couple of the headlines here. Muslim group in Malaysia and Indonesia boycott Starbucks for supporting same-sex marriage. Now here you have one protected group, one victimized group, according to the anti-freedom folks here in America, Muslims. They're a protected group, victimized group here in the United States that are boycotting, and I don't like Starbucks to begin with. Do they have some good coffee? Yeah, I've had some of their coffee, but what I pay for a cup of coffee, even what I pay for 2 cups of coffee, no. I've actually seen coffees in there. What I pay for 1 cup of coffee bought me 3 pounds of fine ground, dark roast, decaffeinated coffee that has some good flavor in it. That's what I'm drinking right now. Decaffeinated, really rich, robust, not bitter coffee. And so I can make my own coffee at home, and I have for years to get on the road. Very seldom would I stop somewhere and get a coffee to drive to work. I usually made it home, and if I was running behind on time or something like that, then I might stop at Sheetz or something and get me a cup of coffee. I didn't particularly care for Dunkin' Donuts coffee. My preference doesn't matter. We have a local convenience gas station convenience store that's called Sheetz, and they make a good cup of coffee. So sometimes I would do that, but vast majority of times I have a really nice travel mug that I still have, and that's what I use to go back and forth to work when I was drinking coffee a long time. So we have this one protected group boycotting Starbucks for supporting another victimized protected group. And this is by Hank Barron over at Daily Wire, and it seems strange to me, and it seems actually funny, not strange, but strange funny, not funny, ha ha. And it's going to be interesting to me how the SJWs in the world are going to handle this. On one hand, you got this protected group because they think Muslim and Islam is the religion of peace, even though they beat, jail, behead, hang, and throw homosexuals and anybody in the LGBT community, throw them off the buildings, and all the above. So how do you reconcile with that? How do you reconcile this one group that the SJWs are trying to protect and victimize, the Muslims, against? They're boycotting one of their favorite coffee hangouts because that Starbucks is supporting another victimized or victim group, protected, victimized group. And folks, this is what happens. This is a perfect example of what happens when you deal with identity politics. And the anti-freedom folks out there, they deal all the time with identity politics because they want you to be sympathetic to these people, whoever it is, whatever the protected group, whatever the victim group that they have started. They want you to be sympathetic towards that. So that is the end all to be all to that group in their minds, because it gets a part of their narrative advanced if we do that. And again, that is so funny, and I'm kind of anxious to see how they're going to figure this one out. I really am, because folks, again, they twist themselves around in the pretzels to try to please a certain group to advance their agenda. And where does it get them? Where it gets them is these Muslims over in Malaysia are boycotting Starbucks because of their supporting same-sex marriage. That's where it gets them. So what do? Are they going to pit these two groups together? God forbid. It's not about them. But again, in order for identity politics to work, in order for their agenda to get any traction and keep going, they have to forget about yesterday. You know, well, we talked about Muslims yesterday. Now today we're talking about LGBT. Now this story here, they're probably just going to talk about Starbucks and not mention the other two groups. And say, oh, isn't it a pity that people just can't come together? And they'll barely mention the Muslim and the LGBT community that are loggerheads over this. And it is strange. It really, really is. Let's see here. Well, we talked earlier this week. This is Investment Business Daily. Can Trump use fracking to break Putin's stronghold on Eastern Europe? And let me get over to this article here. This is by Investment Business Daily. Maybe you didn't see it on Thursday on his way to the much ballyhooed G20 summit. President Trump attended a far less well-known Free Seas Initiative summit in Warsaw, Poland. While little publicized, it was the most important thing he'll do on this trip. The Three Seas Initiative was started last year with the idea of boosting economic cooperation between 12 countries: Poland, Hungary, Czech Republic, Slovakia, Romania, Bulgaria, Lithuania, Estonia, Latvia, Croatia, Slovenia, and Austria. Most of them former Soviet satellite nations. The idea is to strengthen mutual policies on trade, infrastructure, and politics, but most of all about its energy. And that's where Donald Trump came in. In addition to selling Patriot missile batteries to Poland, in large part to undo the damage of President Obama's official policy of appeasement to Putin's Russia at Eastern Europeans' expense, Trump is promoting U.S. natural gas exports to the nations taking part in the Three Seas group. In doing so, he will not only be helping the U.S. economy, he'll also be loosening Vladimir Putin's tight grip on Eastern Europe's neck. This is important since one of the ways Putin's Russia imposes its will on its neighbors is through its control of energy. Russia is energy rich. Eastern Europe is energy poor. Any nation that doesn't play ball can find itself suddenly with a disruption in supply, as Putin also uses his energy pipelines across Eastern Europe as an economic threat to the European Union, which depends on Russian energy. Again, they're so the lamestream media is so just bogged down with this Russian collusion and trying to get President Trump out of the presidency that this is a good move for President Trump. And we have here in Pennsylvania Lancasters against pipelines. And it's a group sort of like the group out in South Dakota that was against the Dakota Access Pipelines, South and North Dakota. They're trying to stop a natural gas pipeline from Pittsburgh all the way down to the ports below Philadelphia. And they're called natural gas. It's not oil going through there, it's natural gas. We're trying to get this pipeline stopped. And the problem with that is that where they're taking that pipeline, that could make that port one of the biggest liquefied natural gas ports on the East Coast, and take this liquefied natural gas overseas and sell it to these countries. And so, again, President Donald Trump is fulfilling another promise, trying to make America great again economically. and try to have a market for our abundance of natural gas that we found through fracking. Now, I know the environmentalists are going crazy over this, but tough. You know, fracking doesn't do any harm to the environment, doesn't contaminate wells, and if it's done right, and there's companies been fined for not doing it right, but if it's done right, it's a clean operation. And so I thought this was kind of strange that he's going over the G20, and yet he stops over here at the Three Cs initiative, and is making a trade deal with these folks over here to buy our natural gas. And hey, I'm all for that. And if they buy natural gas from us, then they wouldn't have to be so dependent on Russia's natural gas, and then Russia wouldn't have that economic stronghold over them to be able to knock them over the head with it, as it were. Let's see here. There's a couple. Oh. Well, here's one down here. Real quick here. Democrats override Illinois' governor's tax hike veto. Illinois is beyond the verge of bankruptcy. I don't know how they survived this long. And so what's the answer to the Illinois legislature? Raise taxes. We raise taxes, we'll do this. And the governor vetoed it, so the Democrats in Illinois overrode his veto. I'm trying to find that story. Oh yeah, it's tax veto. This is by Bill McMorris, posted on the 6th over at the Washington Free Beacon. And it amazes me. It amazes me how these Democrats literally want to go down the ship, and they never do. You know, they never really go down the ship. They bail before it gets too far. But as far as everything I read, by any stretch of the imagination, Illinois is bankrupt. I mean, they have no money, and this tax increase is going to drive more and more people. Again, this is the beauty of federalism. There are going to be citizens in that state, and enough of them that are going to move out of the state and keep perpetuating the problem. Keep perpetuating the problem, because people move out of the state. Guess what? Illinois can't tax them anymore. If they can't tax them anymore, they're not going to have tax revenues or enough tax revenues coming in with this new tax hike to pay the bills, and they're just pushing the ball down the road. They're kicking the can down the road, as it were. Democrat lawmakers voted 71-42 to override Republican Governor Bruce Rauner's veto of the $5 billion tax hike on Thursday. Illinois has been in a budgetary showdown to address a $6.2 billion deficit, as well as nearly $15 billion in unpaid bills and hundreds of billions of dollars in unfunded retirement benefits for state workers. Rauner had pushed lawmakers to close the deficit by reforming workers' compensation and consolidating local governments, while also capping local property taxes. Democrats who control the state Senate and House of Representatives, along with 16 Republican state representatives, rejected those measures and instead approved hiking income tax from 3.7% to 4.9% and corporate taxes from 5.25% to 7% on Sunday night. Rauner vetoed the bill on Tuesday. Representative Steve Anderson, one of the Republicans who broke with Rauner, defended the measure, saying the tax hike was necessary to avoid a financial meltdown. He said the Republicans did not have the votes to pass Rauner's budget, and that the state needed to pay its immediate debts. Impasse politics do not work, Anderson said. We're going into free fall if we don't do it. Our options are this or financial meltdown. Now I'm going to stop the reading right there. Guess what, Mr. Anderson? You just voted for financial meltdown in Illinois. This will not end well for Illinois. Raising the corporate tax to 7% and raising the income tax to almost 5% on its population, people are going to flee Illinois. Businesses are going to flee Illinois. And by doing this, they have no economic sense whatsoever, no economic common sense whatsoever at all. And this is a problem, folks. This is a huge problem, that they don't have this economic common sense that they should have. And this this almost assures that the meltdown is coming. And when that happens, there's no amount of taxes they're going to be able to raise to stop that. As a matter of fact, a lot of it, from what I've been gathering in the news, the governor's budget was actually to slice some things, cap some things. You know, it was a sensible budget to try to start bringing it back into some fiscal responsibility in Illinois. Illinois eventually is going to have to go bankrupt. And no, I do not believe that federal tax dollars should be used to bail Illinois out. They got themselves into this problem. They need to get themselves out of this problem. You know, it's not up to people, taxpayers in Pennsylvania, to bail Illinois out. We didn't create the problem. We didn't do all these welfare spending programs in Illinois. We didn't have all this frivolous spending. We didn't have all these giant compensation retirement packages for these folks. And this again, here again is another example where the free market would do a better job. Instead of having these pensions that are unending, they should have put this money into defined retirement accounts like 401ks for these folks. That's exactly what they should have been doing. And therefore, then there would be, once a person retires, there is no more future fiscal responsibility the state has with that retiree, because everything's over in a 401k. And what's in it's what's in it. If the person wanted to take it, fine. If they didn't. But a lot of this with the state jobs, that was part of the compensation. You know, this is your retirement. You have to take it. This is the only thing you're going to get. You know, and most people would be stupid not to take it. And I talked to my son about this. He's getting a railroad pension, plus he has a 401k set aside also. That's putting the max money that he can put in that. So when he retires, if he goes to, works there long enough to get retirement, he'll be set in his retirement. But the only retirement, the extra retirement the railroad is going to have on him is the railroad pension. And honestly, I think the railroad needs to update everything economically and get rid of the railroad pension, put everything into a 401k, you know, for their workers. Maybe start up a thrift plan, you know, on the side instead of there's a lot of free market solutions, and I'm not the one to say all the financial vehicles you could use, but there's a lot of financial vehicles you could do to alleviate, when somebody retires, the fiscal responsibility to the state or the school district or whatever. There's a lot of this. Same way with your health insurance. There's a lot. If we get rid of the portability laws in this country, people could become part of associations like AARP, which I'm never going to be a member of. AMAC is where I'm going to get my retirement as far as my discount card and everything, which they keep upping. It used to be 55, and now they upped it to like 60 or something like that. And it's like, what good's turning 55? I can't get the senior discounts, right? But again, health insurance. If we went a free market route where people could be part of these associations, then they pool together, they can have more negotiation with insurance companies. And if insurance companies and people got understood medical savings accounts, we wouldn't be fussing about Medicare, Medicaid, and federal exchanges and state exchanges and Obamacare and Trump care and all this unconstitutional garbage going on today. It would be up to the individual to take care of these things. And like I said, there's no system that's 100%, but I'd bet you $1 to the dozen donuts that the free market solution to health care would encompass and include more people than Obamacare or Trump care ever thought about it being. Think about that, folks. And another thing, if they just repeal, and President Trump's starting to go through this drumbeat now, if they just repeal Obamacare outright and quit talking about replacing it, do the free market solutions about the portability, and and that would allow these associations to bargain, and you could buy your health insurance through these associations. And my suggestion to you would be health savings account, medical savings accounts. Because then you would be spending your own money out of your own account for your normal wear and tear, your doctor visits, office checkups and stuff like that. And on every one I ever checked out in the past of the medical savings accounts were had a rider for catastrophic medical expenses, you know, for the unexpected huge costs. But that's far cheaper than having insurance that pays for every little thing, prescriptions and office visits and glasses and stuff like that. It would all be in your account. You spend it as you need it. Okay? And again, that's a free market solution. And if people don't want to take it, that's up to them. You know, if they made that decision, they can line their beds. Now, there's some people, you know, that work all their lives that may not have had a lot of money throughout their lives, and couldn't afford, you know, any extra insurance to take care of them in their old age. I understand that. But folks, whatever happened to, you know, pre-Social Security, where the parents went and lived with the children and the children took care of their parents in their old age? I mean, our parents took care of us until we left home, usually 18, 19, 20 years. We can't turn around and help take care of our parents. I mean, how selfish of a society have we become? Honestly, how selfish of a society have we become when we can't even do that? And we want to rely on the federal government to take care of that for us. Again, it doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever. So Illinois, they just voted for a meltdown, whether they know it or not. And that Representative Anderson has no economic common sense whatsoever. And they're basically they're shooting themselves in the foot. I'm not going to get into this article, but it just popped up. It was published yesterday. Reverend Jesse Peterson, things got worse under Barack Obama for black Americans. This is by Michael W. Chapman over at cnsnews.com. It's a good article. Go read that. He makes a lot of good points in that. The Washington Free Beacon is reporting, Adam Credo is reporting on July 6th that there's an investigation going on in the Trump administration, but it's not what you think. Trump administration hits at least one national security leak a day threatening U.S. operations. And here again, you don't hear the lamestream media talking about this. Oh, Russian collusion, Russian collusion, Russian collusion, healthcare, healthcare, healthcare. And they don't talk about the deep state that's trying to deep six our country through these national security leaks. And honestly, they've been starting to round up these folks and arrest them, but I think they need to do more. And there is, in my mind, there is a difference between whistleblower and somebody that actually leaks something of a sensitive nature that shouldn't be leaked. Snowden, the more I investigate in that, the more I read about it, I think not everything he did was whistleblowing, but he did the vast majority of it, I believe, was a whistleblowing operation. He should be protected under law because of that. Now, if you noticed, I've just gone past the hour mark. I didn't tell anybody. I just wanted to just do it and see if anybody noticed it. I am going an hour and a half now on Fridays, just to give you a little extra show, sort of recap the week and talk about some things that are heavy on my mind or that I really want to talk about. This next story here, this one is ridiculous to the extreme. I've heard a lot of my anti-freedom friends out there, my regressive socialist friends out there, talk about how mentally unstable President Trump is, and how these armchair psychiatrists and psychologists out there that haven't even talked to President Trump have only seen, and folks, this is the funny part about this. No matter how much he tweets, no matter how much you see him on TV, that's a mere fraction of his life. And if you're a psychiatrist or a psychologist out there and you're diagnosing somebody just on that fraction of your life, you need your license pulled. You're committing malpractice. You haven't sat down with him. You haven't had any sessions with him. You don't know how his mind works. All you have is that little fraction of what we see compared to the rest of his, his whole totality of his life. Democrats are pushing commission on Trump's fitness for presidency. Here are 5 things you need to know. This is by Aaron Bandler over at Daily Wire. He posted this yesterday. And I thought this was a pretty good article that he posted on this, and I thought it was, I kind of figured out where he's going, because I pretty much know where the Daily Wire goes with these articles, but they're they really look at both sides of the story here. He said some Democrats are seriously pushing for a commission that would evaluate President Trump's physical and mental capability for the office of the presidency. The commission would in all likelihood be a political tool for the Democrats against Trump. Here are 5 things you need to know about this proposal for a commission measuring Trump's fitness. 1. The commission, which would be titled the Oversight Commission on Presidential Capacity, will consist of 11 members that would evaluate whether the president is mentally or physically unable to discharge the powers and duties of the office. And now we got a commission here. The Constitution already says how this has to be done with the cabinet and the vice president and everything. But now we want to start up another commission and have more money spent on something that's so stupid. So that's the premise of it. 2, the commission would be an excuse to invoke the 25th Amendment. Here's the relevant text of the 25th Amendment. They put a link in there. Section 4 was written specifically to be used for cases where the president is injured or has a stroke or develops dementia, per Steve Kurtz. And there's another link there. So they're trying to invoke the 25th Amendment. 3, removing Trump through the 25th Amendment will never happen. It's not going to happen. But these people, it's fodder for the anti-freedom folks out there and the blogosphere to actually grab onto and say, oh, we got to do this. This has got to happen. This President Trump, he's crazy. He's going to ruin the country. All these things that he's talking about. That the regressive socialists in this country have still, honestly, folks, and let's say President Trump is president for 2 full terms. Even at the end of his second term, just like at the end of Barack Obama's second term, they were talking, the birthers came out. These folks are going to come out and just be whining about how Hillary should have been president for these past 8 years, and everything would have been so much better with President Hillary instead of. I know Bruce just fell over in his chair out there. Sorry, Bruce. I should have warned you about that. 4. Nevertheless, Raskin has been pushing this bill since April and is now gaining some momentum among Democrats. 23 House members have co-sponsored Raskin's bill to start this commission, but it's not bipartisan. It's 23 Democrats have done this. 5. Raskin's proposal has even received criticism from those who are typically sympathetic to the Democrat Party. Former Democrat Congressman Dennis Kucinich argued that it would backfire on the Democrats. I like anything that backfires on the Democrats, folks. I really do, because they deserve it. They put forth this nonsense here, instead of. And this is the funny thing too here. It just sort of popped into my fertile mind here. They're doing all this stuff, but are they, to try to bring down President Trump and try to remove him? But what are they doing legislatively for their constituents? Unless this is what their constituents want them to do. Now, if the Democrat Party's constituents want them to take down President Trump, then they're doing the will of their constituents, and you can't fault them for that. But then you have to go back to the constituents and say, what are you thinking? And this will backfire on them big time. And again, they just don't understand that. They just don't understand how that's going to backfire on them. Oh, I'm going to have to start planning a short commercial break for these hour-and-a-half shows and stuff like that. So, let me see. I don't have it. No, I never brought the the James Comey music video over here. So, anyway, we'll keep going here. Let me see what I missed here before I get on to this freedom of speech issue with Germany. And this one bothers me a lot. This one really bothers me a lot. Let's see, freedom. Now, this is by Martin Armstrong over at LewRockwell.com. He posted this on July 4th. It's called Freedom of Speech in Germany. Now, if you've heard it whether you heard it or not, I'm just going to give you the snapshot of what's happening in Germany. They're going to hold social media outlets like Facebook and Twitter and other ones, Snapchat and whatever. they're going to hold them responsible for hate speech and stuff like that. And they got so much time. I'll read down through this article here. It's not a very long article, but there's a lot of implications here, as it were, for freedom of speech throughout the world. And again, we are endowed by our Creator with certain inalienable rights. Among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, God gives every man, woman, and child on the face of this earth inalienable rights. Now, whatever country they're in, whether that country protects those rights and and I hate using the word allows, but in some countries it literally is, the government is not allowing their citizens to practice their basic human rights. And Germany's one of them. To me, I think Germany is one of the worst offenders of this, and especially in social media. And in this article, Martin points out, and when I read down through here, he points out that this is pretty much just a money grab by these socialists in Germany. He says most anti-democratic laws, the most anti-democratic law perhaps ever to pass any Western government, just passed in the German Bundestag last week. Even the opposition's Socialist Democratic Party votes to suppress free speech, and it's all geared to end criticism of government. This new law obligates the operators of social networks to block off anything they themselves view might be criminal within 24 hours of receipt of the complaint. The other illegal content may be deleted or blocked within 7 days. The problem is rather simple. It boils down to there is no judicial determination as to what might be criminal, and there is nothing specifically deemed to be criminal in the act. So they say they're going to fine these companies, but they don't define what the criminal act is. That's what Martin's trying to say here. The word criminal is left totally undefined. Traditionally, the foundation of law in a free society is known as due process. This concept comes from the Bible. When Cain killed Abel, God knew what he had done. Nevertheless, he, 1, summoned him, and 2, asked him his side of the story, and 3, judged him, and 4, sentenced him. It is presumed that God knew what took place, yet he still allowed Cain to explain and defend himself. Due process of law. Martin's right, that's very biblical, folks. And he goes on to say here, where's Abel your brother? And he said, I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper? And he said, what have you done? Listen, your brother's blood cries out to me from the soil, and so cursed shall you be by the soil that gaped with its mouth to take your brother's blood from your hand. If you till the soil, it will no longer give you strength. A restless wanderer shall you be on the earth. And that's back in the book of Genesis. This due process of law, which is increasingly under attack by all governments, the Guantanamo Bay detention camp is a prime example how the U.S. government is violating international law and the formation or foundation of due process. The so-called terrorists they keep there are never provided the right in court to defend themselves. There's no evidence to put them on trial, so the government just keeps them locked up with no due process of law because they will not admit what they have done. Lindsey Graham, ranking member of the Judiciary Committee, is an outright traitor to everything held to be fundamental to freedom. He sponsored the bill to indefinitely imprison people, deny them a lawyer, and deny them any right to defend themselves whatsoever. Graham has rejected the very principle of due process of law that even God provided to Cain when he knew what took place. And I'm not sure if I'm saying this right, folks, because I don't know German at all. The Bundestag has just opened the door to the same violation of international law, all because there is a major pension crisis in Germany that the politicians are attempting to hide prior to the election. Thus, exactly what is a criminal is left to the imagination. There is no right to be charged, no right to defend oneself. You are summarily sentenced. Private companies are now replacing courts of law. It is their decision. Wait a minute. It is their decision what is now criminality. There is no right to be heard in a court of law anywhere. They can now arbitrarily shut down anyone speaking content they think the government would not like. Now, we have third parties acting as judges, juries, all because the government does not like social media networks. These private companies must also decide on their view of what is criminality of the reported content within 7 days. Then these private network operators are required by this law to now provide users with a directly accessible procedure for transmitting complaints. Therefore, anyone who disagrees with what is being said can now file a complaint. The network must fear if the government would not like it and judge the provider within 7 days or shut them down. If the complaint management is not established immediately before the election, a fine is threatened. Then if you dare wish to appeal, you will fine 5 million euros against a person responsible for the appeal. The fine itself can be up to 50 million euros against the company itself. A company itself, if it does not now censor everything being written in social networks. This outrageous law is clearly unconstitutional in Germany, and it is an affront to everything regarded as a core principle of free speech and free society. Only the APF objected, with every other party lining up in silence to silence any opposition. The law delegates the distinction between criminal act of hatred, satire, and freedom of expression to social media giants such as Facebook and others, with huge fines for non-compliance with each incident. At 50 million euros per incident, they can bankrupt the biggest social network within a single week. We should take a moment of silence to remember what freedom once was. These people in power no longer represent the people. They are becoming the worst enemy of freedom everywhere. And this was first printed over in Armstrong Economics. Now, there's a lot to unpack there, but first off, my first knee-jerk reaction is, if Germany's going to be this way, then Facebook just pull out of Germany. All right? You're looking to shore up, and a lot of this has to do with their pension crisis that they have over in Jersey, or over in Germany. Fine. You want to be arbitrary about a law against us and free speech? We'll just pull out of Germany. That way you can't fine us. And your people are going to have to find another way to protest your freedom of speech. Now, that's a knee-jerk reaction. I don't know if Facebook's going to do it. I don't know if that's the right thing for Facebook to do, or Twitter, or any other social network platform, or YouTube, whatever, because honestly, I think you're kowtowing to tyranny when you do this. You're kowtowing to tyranny. I'll tell you why. Again, every man, woman, and child on the face of the earth has inalienable rights given to them by God. One of them is freedom of speech. And I'm wondering, because I didn't read the law, and I'm doing some research on it, but I'm wondering if I make let's say I make a video here on YouTube that totally just rips the German government a new one, and it's just totally devastating to their causes over Germany. And let's say I start getting play over Germany on that video. Am I going to get fined because I put that up? Can Germany fine me because people in Germany are viewing my video? Can Facebook be fined because I put that video out? I live in the United States of America. I do not live under German law. If they tried to, honestly, for me, if they tried to fine me, I'd be like, they'd probably have to stitch my side up because I'd laugh so much. First off, I wouldn't pay it. Even if I had the money, I wouldn't pay it. And second off, I would expect the federal government to protect me from such lawsuits. Now, under President Obama, I don't, if that happened under President Obama, I don't know if I'd have that protection or not. And I say that with all sincerity. I think with President Trump, I'd probably have a better shot at being protected from Germany. But can one country, we're talking about the World Wide Web here now, can one country dictate to another country what the free speech rights are of their citizens in their country? If I put a video out that rips Germany and their government, I put it out on the World Wide Web through YouTube. If people in Germany pick it up, fine. If they don't, no skin off my teeth. But I didn't target Germany with it. I targeted it with my remarks, but I didn't go out and actually send that video over to Germany to have somebody put it up on social media over there. It got on the World Wide Web through American servers over here. Or at least through it may not be American servers, let's say through my ISP, which is local. And so I have constitutional protections of free speech. Does that mean Germany can come over here? Like I said, does that mean Germany can shut down my freedom of speech because they disagree with it? And this is the whole, this is the whole thing about speech. Now, truth is the new hate speech. During times of universal deceit, telling the truth becomes a revolutionary act. And this is by George Orwell. And he's absolutely true. If I can say something that is fact-filled, I'm wearing a black Hawaiian shirt. Mostly black. It's not totally black, it's mostly black. I'm wearing a gray with red and white lettering, Ohio State football. Or Ohio State, let me see what it says here. Yeah, just Ohio State Buckeyes. Doesn't really say football. And I'm Ohio State Buckeyes. That's the only sport I follow. Ohio State is football. That's just me, personal preference. Those are facts. It's gray, red and white lettering, a little bit of a black stripe on there, but red and white lettering. This Hawaiian shirt is it's brown, or it's black with some gray coloring on some of the flowers, some like burnt orange on other flowers, and it's like off-white on others. And so it's those are facts that I can put forth. If like I've been talking about the Constitution with this gentleman on Facebook on healthcare, those are facts I'm putting forth about the Constitution. They're unvarnished. You can go right into the Constitution and you can see them. You can go read the Founding Fathers and what their intent was on creating the Constitution. Like I said, it's a limiting document to limit the size and scope and power of the federal government. So therefore, any statement made in that's limiting also. Those are facts. That's the truth. But some people in this country, especially SJW types, they think that's hate speech. They think if I say that you're an individual, need to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and make decisions for yourself, that's hateful. Oh, what about this protected class over here? What about this protected class that's being victimized over here by people like you? So, and they never answer the real question. Well, what about this? What about that? Answer the question. Does the Constitution authorize it or not? I know it doesn't, because it doesn't say so in the Constitution, and there's no amount of argument that you're going to get me to change my mind about that, because it's in black and white. It's factual and truthful about that. So there's a lot of things that can happen in free speech, and for a government to arbitrarily say, and matter of fact, for people, even groups of people like SJWs out there, to say, well, what you're saying is hate speech. It's hateful. Well, that's a very subjective term. That's very subjective on their part to tell me that what I'm doing is hate speech and it's hateful. Because from my perspective, and other people that might agree with me, all they're doing is saying that you're just stating the facts. You're stating the facts as you see them, as you've researched them, and you stand to be corrected if someone comes up with a correction, just like with Christianity. I believe the Bible. I believe there's 5 steps to salvation that are put forth in the Bible, and an essential one of them is baptism for the remission of your sins. That's biblical fact. And until someone can prove to me beyond a reasonable doubt that that's not the case, I will hold to those truths and facts as the Bible puts them forth. And I've had people challenge me numerous times over the years since I became a Christian in October of 1982 to that, and they've never been able to prove using the Bible that baptism is not essential to salvation. And some people take that, my stance on the Bible, as hate speech. Like I said, a very subjective term. I try to be fairly objective when I'm talking about things. I very rarely talk subjectively about things. Unless it's like what color paint I'm going to put on the walls, what shirt I'm going to wear today, what hat I'm going to put on, whether I'm going to wear my glasses or not. If I don't wear my glasses, I can't see the computer screen. I can't see to read it. I can just see blurs and things working around here. But I can choose not to wear my glasses. That's very subjective for me. There's no reason why there's a reason why I should wear my glasses, an objective reason, so I can see, so I can read things clearly, and so I can talk about things and share these issues with you. But when I'm talking about like the Constitution, freedoms, liberty, I get very objective with those things because I want to be fact-filled and truthful when I talk to you about them. And that's the way we need to be. And a lot of folks, a lot of skeptics, like of Christianity, a lot of social justice tyrants, a lot of regressive socialists out there in the anti-freedom movement, and those people, and a lot of those people are against people having more freedom and liberties. So I would consider them to be anti-freedom. A lot of those folks, their arguments are very, very subjective. They're not based on truth and fact. They're based on emotion. And they're based on, well, this group here is protected because they're victims. And we assign a victimhood to them. Again, another very subjective term, because I've asked some social justice tyrants out there, let's get back to the healthcare thing. I said, did you ask everybody? Did you ask everybody in America if they wanted Obamacare? Did you ask them? Well, enough people voted for it. No, that's not my question. Enough Democrats, because they had the majority, voted for it and enacted in law. But what you're telling me in that law, and this is what this gentleman's telling me about, the individual mandate. Did you ask everybody that's of age that can buy health insurance whether they wanted it or not? And I submit to you, no, you didn't. And if you didn't do that, how do you know that America wants this? And see, then again, there we get down to where the rubber meets the road. A preacher friend of mine saying this is just unget-aroundable. That, to me, if you don't know if a person wants it or not, and you can't know because you don't go around talking to them, then how can the federal government, which is to enact laws for the general welfare of everybody, not to enact general welfare, but to act laws for the general welfare of everybody, if you don't know the minds of everybody that you're governing, then how can you enact a law for the general welfare of everybody when you do not know if that person wants to participate in that or not? Therefore, if you can't know that, then the federal government or any government should not be in that decision-making process. That should be an individual decision for the individual or the family or a group of people get together and buy insurance. That should be up to them. The government should not be involved in that at all. Now, again, some people think that's hateful because I'm leaving some people out, but you cannot quantify that. It's just like people with voter fraud, folks. They cannot guarantee you that there's no voter fraud going on. And I've been told, well, that's trying to prove a negative. No, I want guarantees. If you say there's no voter fraud, I want your guarantee that there's no voter fraud. I want your guarantee that my vote, my legal vote, is not disenfranchised by someone that's not eligible to vote. Can you guarantee me that? And they can't. They won't. And that's a problem for them. It really is a problem for them. And this is going to be a problem for Germany. I can see, just like CNN poked the bear. I'm gonna keep an eye on this story, folks. I'm gonna keep an eye on what's trending on Twitter and stuff like that. I think Germany opened up a can of worms here. They really do. And the problem Germany's going to have, let's say, just like CNN blackmail, the hashtag CNN blackmail, that has blown up on Twitter. It really has, and it's blown up on social media everywhere. If enough people on social media look at this and say, well, Germany's out of their collective minds over there, let's show them what we can do. One, Germany's not going to be able to keep track of all this, and two, it's going to get to the point where, like, Facebook and Twitter's like, we're not paying these fines. You know what we're going to do? We're just going to pull out of Germany and let you guys, waller in your own filth over there as far as free speech goes. We're just not going to be there. And I'm pretty sure Twitter and Facebook and other social medias can get along just fine without Germany. And if that happens, This is just my prediction. If Facebook would actually take that principled stance, or Twitter or YouTube take that principled stance with Germany, I think Germany would really back down on this. And if they don't, and they pull out, then who are they going to fine? And good luck trying to get that money out of those companies if you're not in the country anymore. Now, they might be able to take it to the European court, something like that. But you know what? What happens if the rest of Europe starts going against Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube? A principled stance was, you don't want our business, fine, we'll just pull out. And then one of the people, and quite frankly, folks, there's going to become a tipping point over in Europe to where the people who enjoy Facebook and YouTube and Twitter and other Snapchat and Instagram and Pinterest and all these things where you can make these political statements on, or these free speech statements, whether they're political or not, they're going to get tired of it, and guess what's going to happen to their elected officials? They're not going to be elected officials anymore. They're going to replace them with people who want to protect the freedoms and liberties of their citizens and want to enhance them and allow them to explore their freedom and liberties as they see fit. If they want to do something, fine. If they don't want to do something, who cares? It's up to them. It's up to they make the decisions on how much freedom and liberty that they want, not the government and not anybody else. And honestly, folks, it's going to come to a tipping point in any country where they're going to try to limit free speech, whether it's the government or whether it's like in America. You have these regressive groups like Black Lives Matters, like Antifa, which is a joke to me because they're against fascism, yet they're using fascist tactics to proclaim to the world that we are against fascism. So, oh, well, folks, we had a really good show here today. I see I'm winding down just a little over a minute, so I'm going to wrap this all up. Have a great weekend, folks. And remember, on Sunday, attend the Church of God's Choice and be thinking, folks, be thinking about your freedom and liberties, and think about how you're actually being restricted on your freedoms and liberties by not only the government, but by political groups across the spectrum here. And be mindful of that. Honestly, be totally mindful of that, because if you're not mindful of that, if you're not mindful of your own freedoms and liberties, who's going to be? So this has been the Dan Clements Show. I'm your host, Dan Clements, your constitutional warrior. Remember, if you aim at nothing, you hit it every time. Have a great rest of the day, and God bless, and we'll see you Monday at noon.
Thank you for using Blog Talk Radio. Goodbye.